I'm taking a break from my video reading to reply to questions from Isidore.
Hello.
Hello, Isidore. How are you?
Fine, and you?
I'm okay. I'm a little scared of your questions.
Okay. So, why did you choose this book?
Well, for a number of reasons. I think Laruelle is a very important French philosopher, and he's not well known enough in English for a number of reasons. His books were translated rather late compared to their date of publication, and there's something funny with the order of publication. He seems to have been translated at the beginning for some of his later works that had a more religious content and orientation to them, at least superficially. So there seems to have been some sort of, I can't exactly call it a lobby, but some sort of special interest group interest in the use of Laruelle to, in fact, legitimate a form of really sophisticated, refined version of sublimated Christianity. And so we didn't get all the preliminary research, which is at a highly abstract level of philosophy. And we don't get, for the moment, we don't have his more abstract later works. There are two masterpieces that haven't been translated yet, Non-Standard Philosophy and Tetralogos, which was published, I think, 3 years ago. And we're very lucky to have a biography of Ordinary Man that was published in French in 1985. And is, I think, by common agreement, considered to be one of his masterpieces, and was only published in English in 2018. So there's first that he's a very important contributor to the ongoing evolution of French thought, and at the same time he's not well enough known in English. A second reason to talk about him, that maybe we'll explore later on, is that he's in an ongoing dialogue with the thoughts of what are more well-known philosophers in English. There's an intense dialogue from the very beginning with Deleuze's work, and a later dialogue with the work of Badiou. He even wrote a book on Badiou, which was, I think, at least in its outer form, rather severe, and highlighted the differences. But in fact, there are lots of similarities, and this comes out more in Tetralogos, where there's quite a lot of deliberate similarities with Deleuze's work and with Badiou's work, despite his constant attempt to free them from their dogmatic shells.
I see. And when did you first get interested in Laruelle?
Well, that's very interesting. I came to France, to Paris, in 1980 for 6 months, and I was familiar with the work of Deleuze, Foucault, Lyotard, Michel Serres, even a little with Badiou's work. But I'd never heard of Laruelle. And then when I came to Paris, I noticed in the big bookshops that there was one particular bookshop that I loved that was well equipped in philosophical, contemporary philosophical French literature, and it just had a huge display table with all the important works of Deleuze, of Lyotard, of Foucault, and I noticed there were a lot of works At the time, it must have been 5 or 6 by this guy Laruelle. And when I lived through them, I saw that there was a very intellectual, conceptual, abstract style, and that he was engaging the work of Deleuze and Derrida and to a lesser extent other people like Lyotard and Badiou. So I bought the books, I read them, and I was immediately hooked. And then I went back to Sydney, and I had 6 months of waiting to see if I got a French scholarship to come to Paris to study for 4 years. I got that, and I came back to Paris, and suddenly everything had changed. All the thinkers that had interested me were changing their direction, and so this was in 1981, and one of the most interesting changes was in Laruelle's work, where he published The Principle of Minority in 1981. He calls that his breakthrough book to his new set of waves of philosophy. And so, quite naturally, I was even more interested in this change of direction and its relation with the changes of direction in the other philosophers that I was looking at. So, in fact, ever since, over a period of 40 years, I've constantly kept up with the work of Laruelle and read his works as they were published. And his work has been through several different phases, and I was constantly interested by the changes in phases, and I thought his work was just getting better and better.
Okay, and how relevant would you say his work is in 2021?
Well, that's a big question, and I'm not sure fully how to answer it. Obviously, at a conceptual level, I'm talking about the book I'm doing a video reading of, A Biography of Ordinary Man. It is in some ways a book that is out of date and was out of date, passé, when it was published, and in other ways it's really a book that was ahead of its time and may still be ahead of its time today. So it was outdated when it was published because Laruelle didn't seem to register as important what I thought was really important. The change in direction that the different thinkers I had been interested in had effectuated. So, for example, in 1980, I went to Deleuze's seminars, and he was talking about minority struggles and the importance of minority politics in the struggle against the totalitarian tendencies of capitalism. When I came back in 1981, all that was gone, and he was talking in his seminars, and he kept it up for 4 years. He was just talking about the cinema. Lyotard, who I met in 1980 and was interested in science in relation to new communications technologies, he still talked about that a little, but when I came back in 1981, he was mainly interested in the sublime and in the role of the sublime in arts. I can't say anything particular about Foucault beyond the fact that he had already made one turn in the 70s where he became interested more in the actual material side of practices, but in the 80s there was this turn towards the thematics of the hermeneutics of the subject and the care of self. So I attended Foucault's seminars for 4 years. Unfortunately, he died in 1984, and Deleuze reacted to that after his 4 years on the seminar. Apparently, he had intended to do a seminar on what is philosophy, but he spent 1 year analysing the particular underlying logic of Foucault's thought, and he was emphasising another change that had come over all these thinkers, and so Deleuze was practicing that change himself, but emphasising it in Foucault, which was a turn towards the subject. Before there had been a sort of structuralist and hyperstructuralist phase where the subject was considered in the most extreme forms to be useless or ineffectual or illusory adjunct to impersonal or abstract structures. All these people realized that this dissolution of the subject, this disappearance of man, had gone too far, and that it was not tenable except as some sort of correction to the naive theorization of the subject that had gone before. Badiou published Theory of the Subject in 1981. Lyotard found a relation to the subject by means of his analysis of art, even if it was a very strange and deconstructed type of subject. Deleuze, along with Guattari, but on his own as well, had come to analyse what he called processes of subjectivation. So Laruelle seemed not to notice that philosophy had changed and that the thematics of difference and dissolution were no longer the key concepts, but that it was rather a notion of multiplicities, it's true, but of the subject that had come to be at the centre of the research programs of his contemporary dialogical partners, even if they never met and talked to each other, although probably sometimes they did. And so this constant skirmishing with the philosophy of difference is something that, for me, in 1985, dated the book, but may be relevant today because when people discuss Deleuze, many people conflate the philosophy of difference and the philosophy or the thought of multiplicities. So Laruelle is a good corrective to these tendencies in continental philosophical circles today. A second emphasis that has become more important in recent years is the emphasis on the subject. And Laruelle, in a biography of Ordinary Man, starts straight away with the subject. He doesn't sort of work around and say that maybe at an ultimate level of analysis under the structures there's a subject. He says we must start with the subject, otherwise we're never going to get there, or will be only a relative subject. He also says that this subject must be taken as the absolute. It's an absolute subject, and that's an important measure or move that he took in a radical form that the others at that time were not taking, and that has now come to be a sort of future-oriented move that is being taken today. That is to say, focusing more on the subject getting away from the structuralist dissolution, which is also a psychological dissolution. The more you get into French philosophy, the more you may become convinced that you don't exist and that nothing human or subjective exists, and you may become powerless when the idea is to empower you. And the other emphasis that is from the beginning of the book in Laruelle is the emphasis on the absolute. So now we have Badiou's book, the third volume in the Being and Events series, Immanence of Truths, that was published in 2018 and is now going to be published in English in February of next year, where he examines the worlds we know, the knowledges we have from the point of view of the absolute. And there's Zizek, whose latest big book, aside from the books on COVID and the book Hegel and the Wired Brain, is called Sex and the Failed Absolute. And there's this notion that the absolute is subject, otherwise you're condemned to postmodern relativism, and the absolute is subject, the subject is absolute. So you do have, in a form that exists after traversing all this dissolution, you do have a sort of anchoring point, if you will, an absolute of a special sort that is meant to undercut as just one relative development amongst others, this postmodern relativism. So the relativism is itself relativized by a thought that gives preeminence to, as a first axiom, you could even say, that gives preeminence to the absolute, and to the human as absolute, and to the subject as absolute.
Okay, thank you for your answers to my questions, Terence.
Thank you.